Cannabis, marijuana, weed, whatever name you know it by, has been part of human history for thousands of years. For over 5 millennia, this remarkable plant has played roles in medicine, spirituality, agriculture, and culture across the globe. Along the way, it has inspired fascinating stories, traditions, and controversies that continue to this day. Before exploring its history, it's important to understand what cannabis actually is. Marijuana comes from the cannabis plant, a species that humans have cultivated for centuries. Beyond its psychoactive properties, cannabis has long been valued for practical purposes. Its seeds can be eaten as food, while its fibers and oils can be transformed into products such as rope, paper, textiles, and clothing. This versatility made it one of the most useful plants available to ancient societies. The exact origins of cannabis remain uncertain. Scientists know it has existed for an extremely long time, but pinpointing precisely when it first appeared is difficult. While researchers continue searching for answers, the story becomes much clearer once humans enter the picture. One of the earliest chapters of cannabis history takes us to ancient China. Cannabis sativa was widely cultivated because it grew quickly and provided valuable resources, including fiber, grain, and materials for textile production. According to historical accounts, around 2700 BCE, the legendary Chinese emperor Shen Nong recognized the plant's medicinal value. He reportedly used cannabis to address various ailments and documented its benefits in early medical writings. His contributions earned him a lasting reputation as one of the founding figures of traditional Chinese medicine. As trade networks expanded, cannabis began spreading beyond China's borders. The Silk Road, one of the most important trade routes in the ancient world, likely played a major role in carrying the plant across Asia and eventually toward Europe. Stretching thousands of miles, this network connected civilizations, cultures, goods, and ideas, including cannabis. Evidence of cannabis use has also been discovered high in the Pamir Mountains. Archaeologists excavating the ancient Jerzankal cemetery uncovered burial sites dating back roughly 2,500 years. Among the findings were wooden braziers containing traces of burned cannabis. Researchers believe people may have placed cannabis on heated stones during funeral ceremonies, inhaling the smoke as part of ritual practices connected to honoring the dead. What made this discovery particularly significant was the chemical composition of the cannabis residue. The samples contained unusually high levels of tetrahydrocannabinol, better known as THC, the compound responsible for cannabis's psychoactive effects. This finding represents some of the earliest known evidence of humans intentionally using cannabis for its mind-altering properties. Historical references to cannabis continue to appear elsewhere. Around 440 BCE, the Greek historian Herodotus described the customs of the Scythians, a nomadic people who lived across parts of Central Asia. According to his writings, they created enclosed spaces using tents and heated stones, then inhaled cannabis smoke during communal gatherings. Herodotus reported that participants reacted with intense enthusiasm and joy, suggesting cannabis already held an important social and ceremonial role. Over the centuries, cannabis became deeply connected to numerous religious traditions and cultural practices. In India, a preparation known as bhang developed strong associations with Hindu spirituality, particularly with the god Shiva. For generations, bhang has been consumed during major festivals such as Holi and Mahashivaratri. It is often mixed into traditional beverages, including lassi and thande, creating drinks that remain part of certain celebrations today. As maritime trade expanded, cannabis and hemp continued spreading throughout Asia, Africa, Europe, and eventually the Americas. Hemp became especially valuable for sailing societies because its strong fibers were ideal for ropes, rigging, and sails, essential components of ships during the age of exploration. By the mid-1600s, hemp cultivation had become common in the American colonies. The plant's practical uses made it an important agricultural resource. Even George Washington, who would later become the first president of the United States, cultivated hemp on his estate at Mount Vernon. Cannabis had firmly established itself as a globally recognized plant, valued for its industrial applications, respected for its medicinal potential, and embraced by various cultures for spiritual and ceremonial purposes. Long before modern debates about legalization and regulation began, cannabis had already spent thousands of years intertwined with human civilization. Enjoying the video so far? If you're learning something new or having fun, take a second to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. It may seem like a small click, but it helps Buddy Barrow create more videos like this and bring fascinating stories to curious people around the world. Now, let's keep going. During the 19th century, interest in cannabis expanded beyond its traditional uses and began attracting the attention of Western medical researchers. One of the most influential figures in this development was Irish physician William Brooke O'Shaughnessy. While working in India in the 1830s, he observed local communities using cannabis-based preparations as remedies for various ailments. Intrigued by its potential, O'Shaughnessy conducted experiments to explore its medical applications. Although he did not consider cannabis a cure for major diseases, he concluded that it could play a valuable role in treatment. His research suggested that cannabis might help alleviate symptoms associated with conditions such as rheumatism, cholera, seizures, and tetanus. Around this period, a variety known as cannabis indica gained recognition in Western medicine. Often referred to as Indian hemp, this strain became known for its relaxing effects and was incorporated into numerous medicinal products. O'Shaughnessy's work helped introduce cannabis to European and American medical communities, where it became a common ingredient in tinctures, extracts, and patent medicines. By 1850, cannabis had earned a place in the United States Pharmacopoeia, a publication that listed recognized medicinal substances used by physicians. At the same time, recreational interest in cannabis was growing in parts of Europe. In France, a group known as the Club des Hachishans experimented with hashish and explored its effects through literature, philosophy, and artistic expression. Despite its increasing popularity, opposition to cannabis was not a new phenomenon. Historical records show that restrictions on cannabis use had appeared centuries earlier. One of the earliest documented prohibitions occurred in the late 14th century when authorities in parts of Arabia banned the consumption of hashish. As time passed, additional governments introduced their own restrictions. By the 18th and 19th centuries, leaders and colonial administrations in various regions, including parts of the Caribbean, Africa, Asia, and Europe, implemented regulations aimed at limiting cannabis use. Although the motivations differed from place to place, the trend toward greater control had begun. The United States would eventually follow a similar path. In 1914, Congress passed the Harrison Narcotics Act, a law designed primarily to regulate substances such as opium and its derivatives. Manufacturers and distributors faced strict oversight, and access to certain narcotics became heavily restricted. A few years later, the Volstead Act ushered in the era of alcohol prohibition. Beginning in 1920, the sale and distribution of alcoholic beverages became illegal nationwide. While cannabis was not directly targeted by these laws, the growing climate of concerns surrounding intoxicating substances created an environment in which stricter attitudes toward drugs became increasingly common. As governments intensified efforts to regulate narcotics, public fears about addiction and crime grew. Misinformation, sensational stories, and concerns about black market activity contributed to changing perceptions of cannabis. What had once been viewed by many as a useful plant gradually became associated with social disorder and criminal behavior in the public imagination. This shift reached a dramatic peak in 1936 with the release of the film Reefer Madness. Marketed as a warning to young people and parents, the movie portrayed marijuana as a dangerous substance capable of driving ordinary individuals into insanity, violence, and criminal acts. The film relied heavily on exaggerated claims and sensational storytelling rather than scientific evidence. Ironically, the movie would later become famous for entirely different reasons. Future audiences often viewed it as unintentionally humorous, and it eventually gained cult status as one of the most notorious examples of anti-drug propaganda in American history. The following year, anti-marijuana sentiment gained further momentum. Harry Anslinger, head of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, published arguments linking cannabis use to crime, violence, and mental instability. His views helped shape public opinion and influence government policy during a critical period. In 1937, the United States passed the Marijuana Tax Act. Rather than outlawing cannabis outright, the law imposed strict regulations and taxes on its production, sale, and distribution. Failure to comply could result in significant fines and imprisonment. Although cannabis technically remained legal, the new regulations made access increasingly difficult and discouraged widespread use. As a result, recreational cannabis use began to decline, while its medical and industrial applications faced growing obstacles. Yet despite mounting restrictions, cannabis remained part of medical research and continued to attract interest from scientists who believed there was still much to learn about the plant and its potential benefits. Although cannabis faced increasing restrictions during the mid-20th century, scientific research into the plant continued. A major breakthrough came in 1964 when Israeli chemist Raphael McCoulomb successfully identified and isolated tetrahydrocannabinol, THC, the compound primarily responsible for cannabis's psychoactive effects. His work also contributed to a better understanding of cannabidiol, CBD, another major cannabinoid found in the plant. These discoveries transformed cannabis research. Scientists could now study individual compounds more precisely, helping them investigate both the therapeutic potential and psychological effects of cannabis. CBD, in particular, attracted attention because it appeared to offer medical benefits without producing the intoxicating effects commonly associated with THC. At the same time, cannabis was becoming deeply connected to a rapidly changing cultural landscape. During the 1960s, a new countercultural movement emerged, challenging traditional social norms and promoting ideals centered around peace, personal freedom, artistic expression, and opposition to war. Cannabis became one of the symbols most closely associated with this movement. The growing popularity of cannabis was especially visible during the Summer of Love in 1967. Hundreds of thousands of young people gathered in San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury district to celebrate music, creativity, community, and alternative lifestyles. The event attracted widespread media attention and helped cement cannabis as a defining feature of the era's youth culture. Not everyone viewed these developments positively. Many political leaders and government officials saw the rise of drug use as a serious social problem. Among them was President Richard Nixon, who took office determined to address what he considered a growing national crisis. In 1971, Nixon officially declared what became known as the War on Drugs. He described drug abuse as one of the nation's greatest threats and pushed for stronger enforcement measures. Under his administration, the Controlled Substances Act classified cannabis as a Schedule I substance, placing it in the same category as drugs considered to have a high potential for abuse and no accepted medical use under federal law. This classification had far-reaching consequences. It significantly restricted scientific research, increased legal penalties, and shaped federal drug policy for decades to come. Critics later argued that the policy disproportionately affected certain communities and was influenced by broader political motivations beyond public health concerns. The federal government expanded its anti-drug efforts further in 1973 with the creation of the Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA. By consolidating several existing agencies, the DEA became responsible for enforcing federal drug laws and coordinating efforts to combat illegal drug trafficking throughout the United States. The war on drugs intensified during the 1980s under President Ronald Reagan. His administration adopted an even tougher stance on drug enforcement, arguing that stronger penalties were necessary to combat drug-related crime and addiction. The Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1986 increased federal funding for enforcement programs and established mandatory minimum sentences for many drug offenses. As a result, arrests and incarcerations related to drug possession and distribution rose significantly during this period. Cannabis offenses, along with crimes involving substances such as heroin and cocaine, became a major focus of law enforcement efforts. Public awareness campaigns also played a central role in the government's strategy. First Lady Nancy Reagan became the face of the Just Say No campaign, which encouraged young people to avoid drugs altogether. The initiative was widely promoted through schools, public appearances, and media campaigns across the country. Another influential program emerged in 1983 with the creation of DARE, Drug Abuse Resistance Education. Police officers visited schools to teach students about the dangers of drug use and provide strategies for resisting peer pressure. The program became one of the most recognizable anti-drug initiatives in American history and expanded beyond the United States into other countries. Many public service announcements from this era became iconic. One of the most famous examples was the 1987 commercial, "This is your brain on drugs," which used the image of a frying egg to symbolize the effects of drug use on the human brain. The advertisement became deeply embedded in popular culture and remains widely referenced decades later. Despite the aggressive enforcement policies and public campaigns of the 1970s and 1980s, debates surrounding cannabis continued to evolve. Researchers, patients, activists, and policymakers increasingly questioned whether the plant truly belonged in the same legal category as some of the most dangerous narcotics. These debates would eventually help lay the foundation for a major shift in public opinion and cannabis policy during the decades that followed. The modern era of cannabis began to take shape in the 1990s as public attitudes toward the plant started to shift. Growing scientific research, patient advocacy, and changing social perspectives fueled a movement that challenged decades of strict prohibition. A major turning point came in 1996 when California became the first U.S. state to legalize medical cannabis through Proposition 215, also known as the Compassionate Use Act. The measure allowed patients with certain medical conditions to access cannabis with a physician's recommendation. Although previous attempts had faced political resistance, supporters took their case directly to voters, and the public approved it. California's decision marked the beginning of a broader trend. Over the following years, numerous states introduced their own medical cannabis programs, gradually expanding access for patients seeking alternative treatment options. What had once been considered politically controversial was increasingly entering mainstream discussion. The movement was not limited to the United States. Around the world, governments began re-evaluating long-standing cannabis policies. The Netherlands established a legal framework for medical cannabis in 2000, followed by Canada in 2001. In the years that followed, additional countries adopted medical cannabis programs, reflecting a growing willingness to explore the plant's therapeutic potential through regulation rather than prohibition. Meanwhile, cannabis was becoming increasingly visible in popular culture. During the 1990s and early 2000s, it appeared more frequently in movies, television, music, and comedy. A genre known as the stoner comedy gained popularity, focusing on humorous stories centered around cannabis culture and its enthusiasts. Although cannabis had appeared in films for decades, movies such as Up in Smoke helped establish the genre as a recognizable part of entertainment. These productions presented cannabis in a lighter and often comedic manner, a sharp contrast to the fear-based portrayals that had dominated earlier decades. Music also played a significant role in shaping cannabis's public image. Few artists became more closely associated with the plant than rapper Snoop Dogg. From the beginning of his career, cannabis references featured prominently in his music and public persona. Over time, he became one of the most recognizable advocates for cannabis legalization and normalization within popular culture. As legal barriers gradually loosened, the cannabis industry itself began to grow. Entrepreneurs, investors, and public figures entered the emerging market, creating businesses focused on cannabis products, cultivation, and related services. What had once operated largely in the shadows was becoming a legitimate commercial sector in many jurisdictions. A historic milestone arrived in 2012 when Colorado and Washington became the first U.S. states to legalize recreational cannabis for adults. Their decisions represented a significant departure from traditional drug policy and attracted worldwide attention. For the first time, adults could legally purchase and use cannabis for non-medical purposes under regulated systems. The international movement continued gaining momentum. In 2013, Uruguay became the first country in the world to fully legalize cannabis for both medical and recreational use. Uruguay's approach demonstrated that a nation could regulate cannabis at a national level rather than relying solely on prohibition. Other countries soon followed with varying degrees of legalization or decriminalization. Nations such as Canada, South Africa, Malta, Thailand, and Luxembourg adopted policies that reflected a changing global perspective on cannabis regulation. In the United States, federal law continued to classify cannabis as an illegal substance, but many states moved in a different direction. Medical cannabis programs expanded across much of the country, while an increasing number of states legalized recreational use. The gap between state and federal policy became one of the defining features of modern cannabis regulation. Further momentum came in 2022 when then-President Joe Biden announced pardons for certain federal cannabis possession offenses and encouraged state leaders to consider similar actions. The move was widely viewed as another step toward broader reform and reflected changing attitudes among both policymakers and the public. Today, cannabis occupies a unique place in society. Once valued primarily as an agricultural crop, later condemned as a dangerous narcotic, and eventually rediscovered for its medical applications, the plant has undergone one of the most dramatic reputation shifts in modern history. Its story is far from over. Debates surrounding legalization, medical research, regulation, taxation, and public health continue across the world. Yet regardless of where those discussions lead, cannabis has already secured its place as one of humanity's most influential and controversial plants, a species whose history is deeply intertwined with culture, medicine, politics, and society itself. Hey buddy, real quick, don't forget to hit that like button, make sure you're subscribed, and tap the notification bell so you don't miss any future adventures. It means a lot and helps Buddy Barrow keep bringing you more fascinating stories, hidden facts, and big ideas. All right, my friend.